on a special edition of Brian Ross Investigates. That lab in Wuhan, China, run by a doctor known as the Batwoman. The Trump administration now claims there is evidence this is where the coronavirus got loose.
I can tell you that there is a significant amount of evidence that this came from that laboratory in Wuhan.
What is the evidence? Or is it an effort by the Trump administration to shift the blame to China? We're joined by the CIA's former station chief in Beijing. Plus, your pets and COVID-19, and the case of a dog named Winston who became infected by his human owners.
His signs were that he lost his appetite for a few days and then made a little gagging noise.
Plus, your questions about COVID-19 and the law, your job, your home, your rights.
We'd like to know what rights we have.
What do you suggest we do?
From the Law&Crime Network, this is a special COVID-19 edition of Brian Ross Investigates. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Ross, and this is a special report for the Law&Crime Network and for our viewers on Facebook Live and YouTube Live. I'm joined today by my colleague at Law&Crime, executive producer Rhonda Schwartz. And Rhonda, we're going to begin with talk about that lab in China and the solid allegations being made by the Trump administration. They say they're solid, at least, of that's the place where the whole thing started.
That's right, Brian. There's been a lot of confusion, a lot of conflicting information, but everyone is wondering, did the virus come from that lab in China? A lot of talk about that over the last few days.
Absolutely. Here's what President Trump had to say in an appearance on Fox News over the weekend.
Are you suggesting that maybe you have some evidence that this was not a naturally occurring virus?
We're going to see what it is. You're talking about the virus and
Correct.
where it came from?
Yeah.
No, we're going to see where it is. We're going to see where it comes from. And, look, you know every theory. You had the theory from the lab. You had the theory from many different, the bats, and the type of bat, and the bat is 40 miles away, so it couldn't have been here, and it couldn't have been there. And there's a lot of theories. But, yeah, we have people looking at it very, very strongly.
We're going to be given a very strong report as to exactly what we think happened. And I think it'll be very conclusive.
Is there any suggestion that it was anything nefarious or that it was just a mistake?
So I think they made a horrible mistake, and they didn't want to admit it. We wanted to go in. They didn't want us there. Even World Health wanted to go in. They were admitted, but much later, not immediately. And my opinion is they made a mistake. They tried to cover it. They tried to put it out. It's like a fire. It's really like trying to put out a fire. They couldn't put out the fire.
And Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was even stronger in saying there is solid evidence of all this.
There's enormous evidence that that's where this began. We've said from the beginning that this was a virus that originated in Wuhan, China. We took a lot of grief for that from the outset, but I think the whole world can see now. Remember, China has a history of infecting the world, and they have a history of running substandard laboratories. These are not the first times that we've had a world exposed to viruses as a result of failures in a Chinese lab. And so while the intelligence community continues to do its work, they should continue to do that and verify so that we are certain. I can tell you that there is a significant amount of evidence that this came from that laboratory in Wuhan.
But whatever that evidence is, it has not yet been presented. And Rhonda, there are some people who dispute the claims from the Trump administration.
Exactly. And Dr. Fauci gave a new interview to National Geographic and said flatly, this virus did not come from a laboratory, was not a man-made occurrence. So we have a lot of conflicting statements from high officials about this.
Right. And the Office of the Director of National Intelligence has also indicated it was not man-made, but did not specify whether it might have come out of that lab by accident. So to find out more about this, we're joined by a very special guest, Randy Phillips, the former CIA country chief in China, now with the Minsk Group, a senior partner for the Asia aspect of that Minsk Group. And Randy, thanks for joining us. What is your take on this?
Well, thank you, Brian. I think there's several different ways to look at this, and just watching your opening clip, I think, kind of put this in stark relief. The easiest thing, I think, to rule out from what we're seeing by the evidence and from the statement from the DNI last week and Dr. Fauci last night is that there seems to be no evidence that anybody has brought forward to say that this is man-made or artificially manipulated. So if you put that aside, then the question becomes, based on the evidence, there's no doubt there was a lot that came out in and around that wet market, and the science says that it has evolved from nature. Now, it's either something that happened at that wet market or a similar place where it jumped from bats to a carrier to humans, or we do know that at that lab in Wuhan, they were conducting tests for years, some of it at the behest, or at least the partial support of the CDC, on exactly these kind of coronaviruses. I think the one statement from one scientific source had it as a 96.2% match to what we're seeing in the current coronavirus. So those are the two areas that I think need to be run to ground to see what we learn. And you got the scientific track going on, and you have the intelligence track going on. And hopefully those two converge and we get to a bottom line.
And let me ask you, what's the reputation of that lab in terms of its safety precautions?
Well, it's had its issues. There was enough publicity put out there about a U.S. Embassy Beijing trip there in 2018 to take a look at that lab as part of its general reporting on China's scientific research, and had written back to the State Department, and this has been made public since then, of some of the flaws in security practices and safety practices at that lab. That lab is also very much in the center of Wuhan. I think it's about 9 miles away from the wet market in question. And so there have been concerns on that lab, just like there have been on other labs, as Secretary Pompeo said in your opening statement.
Randy, a question for you from Rhonda Schwartz. Rhonda?
As a former intelligence official, when you have the politician saying one thing and the doctor saying another, and then the head of national intelligence saying something else, what's really going on behind the scenes? How do you sort that out?
Well, Rhonda, I appreciate that question. If it were any other administration that we've seen before this administration, the kind of statements that you see coming out of the president's mouth and out of the Secretary of State's mouth in terms of their high degree of confidence would have very much carried a message to all parties, the American people, foreign governments, that we must have pretty solid consensus of evidence to back that up. The problem is that we have seen a number of times in this administration where statements like that haven't been backed up by the facts. So I think there's a strong element of doubt out there. Ultimately, I think like we saw with the SARS outbreak in 2003, it's going to take the scientists to really come to some kind of consensus in this, and or an intelligence assessment backed up by evidence that can be pointed to and released publicly to really make the case.
So, Randy, how do the intelligence officers on the ground now in China, how do they get to the truth in a situation like this in a country like that?
Very difficult, very difficult. The job of intelligence obviously is to look at all sources of information, put them together, try to make sense of the trends that you're seeing, figure out where your gaps are, and try to fill them as best you can. It's almost never a 100% exercise. And so in this kind of situation, I would imagine, and I'm confident, that U.S. intelligence agencies, and there has been a lot of discussion in recent days about the Five Eyes, I'm sure that they are talking about it amongst themselves, that there are efforts to look at not only what is out in open source information, but what we may see from other types of intelligence, signals intelligence, human intelligence, to really be able to kind of get to a smoking gun scenario. The human source piece, I think, is the most important.
The other aspect of this, clearly, whatever the controversy of the lab, there is a track record of China not being forthright about problems that they want to keep hidden. Isn't that true?
Absolutely. And that's where the natural human instinct is to, and then they talk about generals always fighting the last war. I think human nature response is take a look at what we've seen before. And you have two recent outbreaks that were somewhat similar to this in the bird flu in 2009 and the SARS epidemic in 2003. And in both cases, most predominantly the SARS situation, there was a clear effort by the Chinese Communist Party to cover that up for a period of time and not reveal the truth, which really caused problems, obviously health-wise for its people, but also its reputation amongst the Chinese people themselves and around the world. And so the instinct was this must be going on again. Even among the Chinese people this time around, there was great concern back in January and February that this was going on. And certainly they've tried to work a bit since then to become a little more transparent, but there still are significant doubts in terms of the accuracy of the numbers that they've put out and their willingness to allow, whether it's the US, other countries, Australia, the UK, that have been arguing for this, to allow inspectors to come in and have an international review of exactly what happened here.
Talking with Randy Phillips, the former CIA country chief in China, there have been reports in the Washington Post and elsewhere that the CIA and the intelligence community provided details to President Trump back in January that this was perhaps coming. Is it really the kind of thing that the CIA and others track?
Absolutely. This is something that certainly I could speak to within the CIA for decades now. There have been certainly analytical units that have watched for this type of pandemic that would be a threat to health and security around the world, and primarily to the US people. And so there's no doubt that there are analysts and collectors that are looking at this. That would have been one part of the feed that went to that National Security Council unit that was more or less disbanded in 2018. No doubt that this is a very important piece of collection, just given what we're seeing today in terms of the economic impact and the health and security of not only the American people, but the world.
You know, the president has been so critical of the intelligence community, sort of criticizing it when they give him information that he doesn't want to hear. That has to affect the performance of people in the field, doesn't it, when the president is not listening?
Absolutely. That's your customer number one is the President of the United States. And throughout my 28 years with the agency, and I know virtually all of my colleagues, when you were able to be involved with something that ended up on the president's desk, that was a significant achievement that you felt very proud of, because you knew you were doing something that really mattered. If the president is not consuming the intelligence or doesn't believe the intelligence, or in this case is speaking out very broadly about not trusting the intelligence, that absolutely has an impact on morale and probably a bit of a indirect feeling of how much effort you're going to make in terms of doing your job. I'm confident that the professionalism of the intelligence community has carried on despite all of this, but it definitely makes it hard.
It's hard enough, and then under any circumstances. How do CIA officers carry out their jobs in the middle of a pandemic when health is such at risk?
It's certainly tough, particularly for those whose job it is to go out and meet people and share information, try to find a way to fill in the blanks. When you're not able to meet in person, that takes away a certain element of just sort of human nature and trust that you're able to develop with people who might be able to tell you something that you'd like to know. So you end up having to do more indirect ways of reaching out to people, which can suffice to a point, but it's definitely not ideal.
And finally, do you think the CIA, the American intelligence community, will actually be able to get to the bottom of this and figure out where that virus actually came from?
I do. I'm confident that certainly the scientists will track this down. It may take longer, but the thoroughness of that will be very important. I think that I'm hopeful that the statements that came out from the Secretary of State and the President are backed up by a certain amount of evidence that may or may not have been shared with our Five Eyes partners. I'm confident that if it hasn't been, if there is such evidence, that it will be obtained, and there will be the ability to put together an assessment with a high degree of accuracy.
All right, Randy Phillips, I want to thank you so much. Randy is the former country chief for the CIA in China, and now with the Minsk Group, the senior partner in charge of the Asia operation. Again, Randy Phillips, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Rhonda.
All right, coming up, your questions about COVID-19 and the law, and questions about your pets. Is your dog at risk? We'll talk about it when we come back. You're watching the Law and Crime Trial Network. Back now, with much of the country under lockdown, we're at home with our pets. And new concern about that after a dog in North Carolina, a pug named Winston, came down with the coronavirus, apparently from its owners. So, what should you do about your pets? Are they safe? Could they give it to you? I talked to Gene Shafiroff, an ambassador for the American Humane Society, earlier this week. Gene Shafiroff, thank you so much for joining us. We now see that humans can give COVID-19 virus to dogs. Is the reverse true as well?
Well, so far in the United States, there is only one case of one dog coming down with COVID-19. And Brian, his owners, this is down in North Carolina, it was a little pug owned by a man who worked in the emergency room of a hospital. And this man was in contact with a number of COVID-19 patients, and his wife was or is a pediatrician. And so this gentleman came down with COVID-19. His wife came down with it. And then one of their children, a son, they have 3 pets. One was a cat and then 2 dogs. And one of the 2 dogs tested positive for COVID-19. And that dog is a little pug. And I don't know if you are aware of this, but pugs are known to have respiratory issues. And so Winston the pug, as I said, tested positive, and his signs were that he lost his appetite for a few days and then made a little gagging noise. And we are seeing now in the United States that there are over 1 million people who have tested positive for COVID-19, but only 1 dog. And I think there are 2 cats and then 8 or 9 tigers and lions at the Bronx Zoo. So with only 1 dog testing positive, I don't think we know very much right now. And there is absolutely no evidence, according to the CDC, their reports, that a dog can give a human being COVID-19.
So we're safe from our pets picking up and bringing it home. But what about the fact that 1 dog did get it? What's the best advice for dog owners given this somewhat concerning news about 1 dog, Winston, getting a COVID-19?
The CDC is advising that pet owners social distance their pets just the way you would social distance yourself. For example, when you take a dog out on a walk, you should have your dog leashed, and then that dog should social distance 6 feet away from other dogs and then human beings. They're not saying anything about a dog wearing a mask. Cats should remain inside the house. And also, they're suggesting that people not take their dogs to dog parks right now. Finally, they're suggesting with dogs that if your dog goes outside, rolls around in the mud or in the grass, you should clean your dog off before you bring him home.
So are you concerned? You have a number of stray dogs with you. Are you concerned about perhaps the dogs might pick this up somewhere?
We have 5 incredibly wonderful rescue dogs. We have no concern at all. We do have a yard, and when we take our dogs out on a walk, they are on a leash, and we are social distancing them from other dogs and other people. So I have no concern at all. And of course, we keep our dogs clean.
Right. And of course, while Winston, the pug down in North Carolina, was tested, most dogs aren't going to be tested for COVID-19. There's not enough tests now for human beings, much less dogs. So it's not easy to know that completely dogs are in the clear, right? Given the fact that tigers, for some reason, picked it up in the zoos.
Yes, well, generally speaking, dogs don't seem to really get sick. And so if you have a dog and he's not sick, you wouldn't take him to the vet. So I'm not worried about this. I think that if you exercise precautions, you do not have to have your dog wear a mask.
All right. So it seems likely we can give it to animals. They can't at the moment seem to give it to us. Gene, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate your insight, and go take care of those dogs. We can hear them barking in the background.
Thank you. Okay. Have a great day. Thank you, Brian.
And coming up now, your questions about COVID-19 and the law for our panel of legal experts, and some random acts of kindness caught by our producers. Take a look. You're watching the Law and Crime Trial Network.
Do you have any objections to us looking at everything on your phone?
In a way, she's almost a younger, more vibrant version of Shanann.
As soon as he met Nicole Kessinger, Chris wanted out.
She knew that he would always choose her.
That tells you everything you need to know about Chris Watts, is that he didn't know what it felt like to love someone. Chris's solution was to plot murder.
She had proof something else was going on.
Back now with your questions about COVID-19, the law. And Rhonda Schwartz, this week we've seen some surprising figures reported by the New York Times about the expected death toll in this country.
Unfortunately, sadly, we have learned of new reports that the death toll may be twice what was expected, possibly exceeding 100,000 people by August. So pretty sad news that we're hearing today.
Yet among all the sad news, Rhonda, there's still some random acts of kindness that we've seen in New York. Our producer, Ariel, to put together a montage of some of those examples.
Broadway actor is turning to his talents to show his appreciation for New York City's healthcare workers.
This is our quest to follow that star.
All across the city tonight, residents joined in to sing a familiar song that is sure to raise the spirits of every New Yorker.
From apartment windows to car radios, New Yorkers joined together in triumphant song Thursday. The lyrics of New York, New York, capturing the emotions of a defiant city in the throes of a heated battle. And the spirit of a people who will pull through.
The boxes and bags of food they gave out purchased from island's struggling businesses, a strategic move with two goals: feed New Yorkers and support those businesses.
This is a movement we started. It's a GoFundMe where we are raising money to help support local restaurants who are then feeding the frontline healthcare workers.
In just 1 month, the movement grew from 1 city to 20 cities, from 100 meals to 100,000 meals, all purchased from local restaurants and donated to medical professionals.
We started literally just calling hospitals and asking what we could do as a team. Being able to, in some small way, support the efforts of those who are helping us as a community is immeasurable.
Kindness, strength, and resolve, but still lots of questions. And to answer your questions, we're joined today by two lawyers who know a lot about this, starting with Angela Roddick-Wright of the Roddick Law Group in Los Angeles, and Jim Baer with the firm of Baer, Negrin, and Troff, a bankruptcy lawyer. And Jim, let me start with you. We see today and yesterday that J. Crew, the big retailer, is now filing for bankruptcy. So what does that mean for the people who want to shop at J. Crew, who work at J. Crew, and how about the whole business itself?
Well, Brian, when we have a company like J. Crew file for bankruptcy, it obviously is going to get people's attention, and it also is scary, and it raises a lot of questions. First of all, in the short run, nothing will change, meaning the nice thing about bankruptcy is it's a tool. And so what it does is it preserves the status quo. It permits a company not to pay its lenders so that it can continue its operations and get ready in this new second phase to start opening up, preserve jobs, and provide a place for people to shop.
And I assume there are more of them coming, more bankruptcies like that for the big retailers who have been shut down.
We've been in an environment where we've had an expanding economy for many, many years. And when times are good, companies borrow money. It's been reported that companies have a total of up to $15 trillion in debt. When we hit a bump like this, you obviously are going to have some pain and you're going to have a need for bankruptcy. So yes, retail was already struggling, and now this is going to exacerbate that, not only for the retail industry, but it's also going to create new problems and challenges for other companies as well.
Right. A lot of people are struggling. Angela Reddock, right? We've got a question for you from one of our viewers, the owner of a hair salon.
Hello, my name is Lafaya Abdallah, and I own Oasis Hair Salon in Rockville, Maryland. My question is around the PPP loan for small businesses. We are instructed to use the loan 75% for payroll within 8 weeks of the origination of the loan. And how can we do that? Are we to take the employees, pay them, get them off of unemployment, and then we're still not open, so we have to put them back on unemployment? And we really need the funds so that when we start up, we will be able to have funds for payroll. That makes much more sense. Part two of the question is, for the PPP loan, we are required to bring the same amount of employees that we had prior to this event. And if we are limited to the number of people who are to be in a space, then it's going to be very difficult for us to bring all the employees back for the hours of operation.
So Angela, how would you answer her two questions? It's confusing, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And literally right before this broadcast, I was on an email exchange with my own accountant asking the same questions. How exactly does this work, and what are we required to do to make sure that we qualify for the loan forgiveness? So as to the first question, in terms of the percentage of the funds that you're supposed to use for your employees, yes, the very purpose of this loan is to help employers continue employing their employees, or to bring them back soon after the different restrictions are lifted. So the expectation is not that you bring back 100% of your force, but at least 70 to 80% of your workforce. And that's a challenge because many employees that started to receive their state unemployment benefits, especially the added federal stimulus benefit of $600 per week, are not incentivized to come back to work because some of them are making more money than they make when they're working for their employers, or they're enjoying or appreciating the time off and want to extend their unemployment benefits. So hopefully you're working with individuals that are incentivized to come back and want to help their employer who has been good to them to open their doors and to start work again. And certainly you'll be able to show you use the benefits for those individuals. But for your second question, the law does take into account the fact that many employers won't be able to open 100%, or that there'll be continued restrictions in terms of how they operate. So it does account for a discount or a percentage discount in terms of what you're expected to do to qualify for the loan, or for the forgiveness part of the loan. So definitely speak to your accountant, speak to your bookkeeper, segregate the funds to the extent you can so that you can show clearly you use the funds to continue people working and for other overhead expenses that qualify. But it's definitely really challenging. I mean, it seems great that we got these funds, but challenging in the implementation.
Very tough. Jim Bear, a question for you from Rhonda Schwartz. Rhonda?
Bankruptcy is a tool, as you described it. How about for individuals, for families? Is bankruptcy a tool for them during this crisis?
It is, Rhonda. If a family or an individual finds themselves overextended, bankruptcy is a tool and an option, because if you're unable to negotiate with your creditors and you need to use the bankruptcy court, you can file. And people are worried, well, will this affect my ability to get credit down the line? Will it be something that I have to worry about from a reputational perspective? What I tell people in these times is that bankruptcy really does provide you an opportunity to restructure your lives. It also allows you to get back on your feet in a way that allows you to keep some assets and pay it down over time. It is a badge of honor, in my opinion, in this environment, because we're all going through this at the same time. And so instead of it being a stigma because you did something wrong, You're part of a once in 100-year situation. And so you're taking advantage of these tools that we have in place. We're a country that doesn't have debtor prisons. We have tools in place. We have systems designed to help you get back on your feet. There have been studies done that it's easier to get a credit card after you filed bankruptcy because there are limitations in how often you can file. And the credit card companies have actually done the analysis and determined that you're a better credit risk after you've come out of bankruptcy.
That's really interesting. But Jim Bear, there must be some downside to filing for bankruptcy. It's not that easy, is it?
Look, as we all know, these are challenging times. We've been through things like this before. We've gotten through it. We are a great country. We are a very creative people. But to say this is going to be easy and that there aren't challenges and that you won't lose things and that you won't have to start over, that would be an oversimplification. But what I can say is that because there are professionals out there that can guide you through this, if you seek a consultation with a bankruptcy lawyer or other professional, there are ways in which you can minimize the pain. What I've told people when I've restructured businesses or I've helped individuals, what I've said is I've never lost a patient. There really is a way to get through to the other side, but it won't be without pain.
All right. Angela Reddock, right, we've seen a number of the meat packing plants in the Midwest shut down because of safety and health issues. What is the obligation going forward for companies to provide safety and health protection for their employees?
Well, first and foremost, companies definitely and employers definitely have an obligation first to ensure the safety and the protection of their employees. So we understand in the meatpacking industry and so many other industries that they are essential and they're providing essential services, but not at the risk of risking employees' lives. So it is appropriate for these companies to shut down as needed, to sanitize the environment, to get the proper protective equipment for employees, to create the proper social distancing so that they can make sure their employees, and to the extent that they have customers and individuals that visit their sites and their work locations, that they are creating a safe work environment. It is a 100% requirement. There is no way to shrift or to get around this requirement. That is the first and foremost obligation of employers in this environment.
Let me ask a follow-up question to that from one of our viewers. Should people who've been the essential workers still working during all this, should they get some kind of bonus or hazardous duty pay, Angela?
Well, there's nothing under the law that requires bonus or hazardous pay. That's pay that's within the discretion of the employer. Employers first have a duty to make sure that they, at a minimum, are paying their employees the minimum wage for under federal law and under any additional state or local obligations. And then above and beyond that, many states like California require paid sick leave and other types of pay. Anything like vacation or hazardous pay or bonus pay or severance pay, all of that is within the discretion of the employer. And certainly we see many employers are stepping up to the plate and using that discretion to provide bonuses. Just yesterday we saw, I know it's controversial, but we saw Walmart provide bonuses to its employees. We know Starbucks, when this pandemic first hit, that they closed their doors but kept every employee on the payroll for 30 days. All of those are examples of employers using their discretion for good.
All right, we're going to take a break, but when we come back, more of your questions about COVID-19 and the law and the wisdom of the country reopening. Is it too soon? You're watching the Law and Crime Trial Network.
Do you have any objections to us looking at everything on the phone?
In a way, she's almost a younger, more vibrant version of Shanann.
As soon as he met Nicole Kessinger, Chris wanted out.
She knew that he would always choose her.
That tells you everything you need to know about Chris Watts, is that he didn't know what it felt like to love someone. Chris's solution was to plot murder.
She had proof something else was going on.
Back now with more of your questions about COVID-19 and the law. And even as more than 1,000 people in this country die every day from the coronavirus, many states are pushing to reopen, some slower, some faster. President Trump has been pushing hard. Here's how he put it on an appearance on Fox News.
What we have to do is get it open. I see New Jersey's opening up their golf courses. Florida's now opening up their golf courses. Parks are opening. Beaches are opening. At some point, we have to open our country. I wish I could help them. I'd even help them personally, because you know what? It's not a big business, but for them, it's a big thing, and they probably do a fantastic job. I could see they have such great spirit. What we do is we loan the money to small businesses, but not necessarily business. You know, it's an unusual circumstance where they're each their own employee. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at that. Maybe there is something we can do.
So there are lots of questions now about the reopening and what happens. And one of them, Angela Roddick, right, came from one of our viewers, Brittany. Here's her question that she sent in to us by video.
Hi, my name is Brittany, and I live in Maryland right now, but I'm originally from Arkansas. And Arkansas is one of the few states that never had a shelter-in-place order and has already reopened many non-essential businesses. So concern for a lot of my friends and family members back home is if you're immunocompromised, or if you're at risk, or if you just want to stay home longer to stay safe, what kind of resources or legal recourse do you have to try to stay home and stay safe?
So, Angela, what would you say to that? What is the recourse for somebody who wants to stay home even as their business reopens?
So we need to think about this in two categories. So we have essential employees, which under the law are required to work. And if they can't work, then they have to fall into a category of being able to qualify for some type of sick leave, paid or unpaid sick leave, or some other condition that allows them to be able to stay home because they are dealing with a COVID-19 related situation, either for themselves or for a close family member or for a child being out of school, for example. For non-essential workers, those of us that are going to be required to go back to work as these safety orders are lifted and social distancing orders are lifted, the duty then becomes, if you're able to go back to work, then and you can show that you can't go back to work, you may not qualify for unemployment benefits, because with unemployment benefits, you have to show that you were laid off or you were terminated and it's the fault of your employer that you're not working. But if you choose not to work, that's fine, and your employer may allow that and may continue you on some type of laid off or furlough status, or may even just say you're terminated. But you have to realize that most likely you would not apply for unemployment benefits in that instance. And then you may, if you can't show that you actually have tested positive for COVID-19, or that you are taking care of someone who has, or you're required to be out for your child, you still may be required to go to work. And if you choose not to, then you may have to accept a separation or a termination. But I think the general rule of thumb here is if you're required to work because you're an essential worker, or once the orders are lifted and you're allowed to go back to work and you choose not to, then the recourse is not much other than you making the choice on your own that you're choosing not to go to work, but just realize you may not benefit from some of the benefits that are out there.
All right. And Jim Bear, a question for you about the reopening that's beginning to slowly take place as the number of deaths, for instance, and hospitalizations in New York start to ebb off just slightly. It's a slow plateau that's lessening. But as Warren Buffett once famously said, when the tide goes out, we'll see who's not wearing a bathing suit. As the country reopens, we're going to see companies just can't make it anymore, aren't we?
We will. And that is one of the challenges that we're going to face, because part of capitalism is that there are winners and there are losers, and there are certain things that will precipitate that. And in a situation like this, where you start to think forward as to how is this going to come back, we have to think about how quickly are people going to get on airplanes? How quickly are people going to take cruises? How quickly are people going to go back to malls? Or how quickly are people going to go back to sporting events? Also, we have different demographics. We have people that do have immune systems that are compromised. We have elder people that are more susceptible. They're going to be more cautious. So one of the things that people need to focus on is we have a consumer-driven economy. And just the fact that people can go out doesn't mean they will go out. So how we handle this, how we talk about this, what kind of protective gear we have, one of the things that I'm urging our leaders and people to do is to try to create a sense of there's a plan, we're going to get through this, because if consumer confidence does not come back commensurate with the opening, it's going to be more painful for people. And so what we have to do is we have to recognize that we only have fear itself. We have to get into this together, come up with a plan, and we will get to the other side.
And Jim, as you say, there's a Washington Post poll out today that indicates the majority of Americans, 70% or more, are concerned about reopening the country too fast. They're more concerned about getting the virus than they are about going back to work. So which companies do you think are going to get hurt the most here? Which sectors do you think?
Well, the sectors that are going to get hurt, and I don't have a crystal ball, but I do spend time trying to think about this because as an investor, as an advisor, I also own a company called CMBG Advisors that restructures companies. And so we have to kind of guide them in terms of who would be the likely buyers for those companies, who's going to lend to those companies. So when you look at the different segments, I think one of the interesting areas to look at is commercial real estate. Retail got hit hard. We call it the Amazon online phenomenon. I think everyone felt like housing, commercial was pretty solid. We are now demonstrating that the world for many people can operate the way we're doing right now, from home, with Skype, with technology, Zoom. I don't think there will be a rush for people to take on more commercial space. People are talking about downsizing. So I think commercial real estate's going to get hit. Now, when you think about other industries, again, travel and leisure, airplanes, if you have to take a business trip, you're going to take that trip. But if you can drive to San Francisco from Los Angeles, are you going to drive instead of fly? I think so. Obviously, the travel industry. There's a rumor that Hertz may file. We heard about airlines having challenges, but then we have to start thinking who services the airlines. Sugarfina sells candy at airports. See's Candy sells candy at airports. Hertz is at the airports where you pick up a rental car. If people are not flying, it's going to affect the rental cars. So you then travel into travel and entertainment, going to sporting events, concerts, theater, anything where people are gathering in place. So those are the areas that I think are going to get hit the most.
Okay, all right. Angela Roddick Wright, just 1 minute left here. Let me ask you, what's the big question, the one question that people should ask as they think about going back to work?
Is it safe? Has my employer taken the steps to ensure a safe environment? If we need protective equipment, is the employer prepared to provide that protective equipment? Will our workstations and our work areas be remotely distanced? As we have customers come in, will we be protected when will we require certain requirements of our customers as they come in? I think that is the key question. As Jim said, or as the Washington poll showed, that 70% of people, while they can get back out possibly starting this weekend and next week, everyone's still concerned about their safety. So I think everything that employers can do, all steps employers can take to ensure a safe working environment will be key to getting folks back to work and getting our economy moving again.
All right. Well, Angela Roddick Wright, thank you so much. Jim Baer, thank you so much. And Rhonda Schwartz, thanks for being along today. This is Brian Ross. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be back next week with more of our special report on the Law and Crime Trial Network.